This is an Irish independent podcast.
Bits and Bobs today was not the plan, but we're here nonetheless. It's a bit like Jurassic Park. Just it finds a way. Bits and Bobs. It's just like nature. You can't legislate for how it'll weasel its way through. So Ian Madigan sends his apologies. He had to cry off. Otherwise engaged last minute. Will Slattery was due to be on with Ian, but he's still here.
Hi Joe.
You showed up.
I did. Dependable.
And Conan Doherty also here. Hello.
I have to say I was a bit nervous now coming in off the back of the Champions Cup weekend, and I saw yourself and Will walking into the studio. I was like, am I going into a rugby podcast here?
Some rugby will feature. Obviously it was a big weekend, and in fairness to Will, he dedicated most of it to watching, studying the rugby, thinking he was on a rugby podcast, and now you're stuck with this mess.
I was looking forward to really spreading my wings on an Indosport rugby show, telling my wife, no, I have to stay, I have to watch all this rugby all weekend.
Yeah.
So I did mention to her that it's been a change of plan, and she was devastated as well as I was.
A few things, different things going on. Somebody reached out to me who has knowledge of the Castore situation, which we talked about last week. It was all very interesting, the extent to which they've gone from not existing in 2015 to now being a £1 billion company, some equity for Andy Murray. Do you still think he got 20%, yeah?
No. I've rowed back. And actually, I want to apologise to you because I said you could do it a finance course. Yeah. And afterwards I was like, I was actually kind of talking out of my arse there. Yeah. So, Joe, I apologise.
Accepted.
And to the listeners and to the viewers, I'm actually looking in the barrel of the camera like Butch Harmon here. Like, I apologise.
Yeah. What's the reason you're rolling back?
Because I did some research myself, as I said I would after the show. And it appears that the two lads only have a certain percentage. So I was like, there's no way Andy Farrell has 25 if the lads only.
Andy Murray. You called Andy Murray Andy Farrell there.
Did I? Andy Murray, I'm going to say.
It's just rugby.
Thanks to kick him on 20% and he doesn't know his name.
The reason I'm almost certain Murray didn't get much stake either is they gave him equity and $8 million a year.
Okay, well that's different. I didn't know. Like that would amount to way more than you'd think they would get if two young boys came to you with this business that was an idea more than anything. And you're going to ask for a high percentage. I've watched enough Dragon's Den to know Andy Murray's got good leverage. So.
No, he does. But
that's what I was basing my estimation on as well.
This was in 19. They weren't, they had an office like at this stage.
They had $8 million a year apparently as well to give them.
So somebody with a good sense of how Castore do go about their business. It's very much as we might have expected, by the way, just to put a dot on last week's discussion on them. Essentially, the reason they have managed to get so many clients is they're willing and have paid minimum double, in some cases, what Canterbury and Adidas are willing to pay as yearly fees to clubs, while still matching the free kit allowance that clubs needed for their teams and staff. Also, they offer long-term deals, usually 5-year contracts in place with most. Hence, very good deal for the clubs. So no surprise, they're just offering better deals.
But how did they start? How did they get that money to offer the better deals?
Well, they just a round of funding, and they were convincing young men, and it goes from there. It's
very impressive.
No, it is. Albeit the reaction, I think, to the quality of their jerseys was mixed when we did touch on this. That is
the YouTube comments indicate that people aren't overly happy with their jerseys from our store.
Some people, I'm sure, lots of people are very happy, but some weren't. The latest, by the way, on Michail Antonio, just in terms of like little things going on. So West Ham released a statement. He has a lower limb fracture, which sounds kind of ominous in those kind of scenarios. They're not good. He's 34 years of age now. So he was in a car crash over the weekend in Essex. I saw Jim White today was reporting. It's his understanding it'll be 12 months before they kind of even know if he'll be able to play football again. So really shocking one for him. The person who found him said, his first words were, "Where am I? What's going on?" So completely disoriented. And the car was a picture. Lower limb fracture in a kind of wider sense mightn't be the worst result given what could have happened. So that's Antonio. Damien Duff, content machine, doing his thing. When is the last time he gave a forgettable interview?
It'll be the first.
Yeah. So he is the Soccer Writers of Ireland Personality of the Year. This was at Clontarf Castle Hotel over the weekend, and he was being interviewed about the night and the honour. When I was collecting my mum and dad today, I was getting into the car and my trousers burst. So it's like straight away,
there we go.
He's off. He's just meant to say, "I'm delighted to get the award. Thanks to everyone. Good luck." So I said to my mum, any chance you have a needle and thread handy? So I drove here today. My dad is sitting beside me. He kept looking down and seeing I'd no trousers on. My mum's in the back with a needle and thread trying to make me look respectable again. So that was how Duff arrived for his Soccer Writers of Ireland Personality of the Year award. And he said a nice thing. So Eamon Dunphy, John Giles and Liam Brady were there. It was the 50th anniversary of the 3-0 win over USSR, the Don Givens hat-trick, so they got the team back together. And Duff said, Eamon, John and Liam, and we know that they don't give praise away cheaply, but they turned to my mum and dad today and they said, you should be proud of your boy. He talked about the celebrations. Everyone knows I'm a hard taskmaster, but I've been celebrating for the last 4 weeks. Then I got sick. I've had the flu all week. I'm going to go back out celebrating very soon again, was his general point there. But he said, to get to the top, you have to make sacrifices. One of those, it was a kind of a very typically honest, open kind of Duff admission, considering his parents are sitting in the crowd. To make it to the top, you have to make sacrifices. One of those is driving past mum and dad's house every day and not having time to call in because there's training to do or a match to go. I don't spend as much time with mum and dad as I'd like to, which is not a shock, but I guess them's the sacrifices you have to make, you know.
I wonder, did they know that he drives past the house every day?
What? So that's Duffer in good form and winning Soccer Writers of Ireland Personality of the Year.
I love the size of the trophy as well. I don't know if you saw the
Big.
photo. It's huge. Bigger than the League of Ireland trophy.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm a big fan of like ostentatiously large trophies, like the Wanamaker trophy. Champions League is pretty big, stuff like that. Stanley Cup. And now the League of Ireland Soccer Writers Personality of the Year.
No, it'll take up space in that shelf. We touched on this on the football show very briefly, didn't really talk about it, but Danny had emailed in to say he was listening to Friday's panel discussion where we had talked about watching matches with the overlap on in the background. He was saying, I was wondering, had you discussed what seems to be a recent phenomenon of how many people consume sports? I know anecdotally, the majority of sport I consume is podcast-based, sprinkled with some highlights I see online. Of course, I will always make time for the bigger games, but more often than not, my catch-up time for sport is when I'm commuting to or from work. I think this goes in tandem with live viewership of games declining. Anyways, big fan. Keep up the great work. Many thanks, Danny. Yeah, I would think, Danny, your anecdotal sense is absolutely becoming a trend. I think people are time poor, busy during the week if they've got demanding jobs, family. Very hard to turn around, unless, of course, you're going to be guesting on the rugby podcast.
Clear the schedule, honey.
And say, I've got, 15 hours of sport I need to watch, and our weekend has to be centred around kickoff times. I suspect lots of people, in fact, I know from talking to lots of people, they still follow sport avidly, but it's through listening to their favourite podcasts during the week as their way of catching up. Say it's Premier League, give your 2-3 minute highlights, done. So I think that's a real phenomenon. Not necessarily a bad one either.
Yeah, and one sport in particular I think this lends itself to, and I know it's gotten popular in the last few years in particular, is NBA basketball, because all the games are on overnight if you live in Ireland. So realistically, how are you going to watch any match really unless you wanted to stay up and watch that? And a lot of people do like basketball and listen to those podcasts, and I'd imagine unless it's the playoffs and they want to stay up at a weekend, like how are you going to watch much of it? So they probably follow it very intently through podcasting.
Yeah.
But in this part of the world, obviously, as that emailer said, for like a big Premier League match, he probably makes the time to see it, but there's lots of other matches he doesn't get to see, aren't even televised, and it is that doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
No, I mean, they're just NBA as well, there are just so many games.
Yeah.
Premier League, so many games. And a huge part of the attraction for people with the Premier League is the soap opera element. And things don't change that much from game to game. So Damien Delaney, I messaged him last week and I sort of said, do you want to take a break from the podcast for a week or two? Because otherwise we're just going to have the same conversations all the time.
Spurs and... As funny as it is, though.
As funny as it is.
That's the first thing I thought of, actually, when I saw the result.
But you know what? He jumped at the chance. He was like, you know what? I was going to text you. Let's do that. And then, so there's a certain... I get him next week or the week after, and it's like, okay, what's happened over the last couple of weeks? So there is that repetitive element to Premier League, so many games, only so much can change, that you don't actually miss all that much if you catch a team, once a month or whatever, in terms of, well, is the right back still a problem? Yeah, he was a problem 2 weeks ago, he's still a problem, whereas the soap opera element, who said what after the match, who's under pressure, all of that stuff that people do enjoy. Podcasts can cover that kind of beautifully and even collate all the different things into a very nice package over 45 minutes on your commute in.
It's a good way of looking at it, the soap opera thing, because it is always nice knowing that it's just on in the background. Even the games you're not watching, there's something nice about like this soap opera. It will continue. There will be a new quote. There will be a new stinker of a performance. There'll be pundits say something, and I can catch up on that. The podcast will be better because of that. But the YouTube viewer habits are very interesting. Like, this is worldwide, but or UK and Ireland anyway. But if you look at Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning is the worst time for YouTube, really, during waking hours anyway.
Right.
But Monday morning, that's not the case. And Friday's Friday, so Friday, people are sort of getting a bit more lax on a Friday, and they're starting to watch the graph start to go up again a lot earlier on a Friday. But on a Monday morning as well, there's a lot of viewers still tuned in, plugged in, and I'm convinced that's sport driving a lot as well. Because Monday people are going to work, you think they're tuned in, they're ready to rock, but actually the graph will show that a lot of people are still, they're on way earlier on a Monday than they will be for the rest of the week.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So they're all saying, geez, it was 4-3 yesterday with Spurs Chelsea, I must watch that.
I did the same myself today. I didn't get the whole Arsenal match. Let's go in and see what happened with that offside goal.
Hey, look, I mean, it makes sense. There is only so much time of a weekend. So, Danny, I don't think you're alone. And thank God you're not. I mean, our business model is sort of founded on that.
You're just saying, "Oh, Damien, take a week off. We don't need to talk about it."
Yeah, well, a bit of right. Jonathan Wilson on today. I mean, no problem listening to that.
But what do you do? Do you prioritise? Like, I know I'm a bit mad. Like, we've got a magnet that you can draw on the fridge, and I will just write down fixtures that are of interest, because I think, like a lot of sports fans, you would fill in your whole weekend, given the time, just sit and watch sport all day, every day. But obviously you can't do that as you grow up and life goes on. So I'll just write down things that'll be really nice to see this one. This one isn't a priority. I haven't quite colour coordinated it yet, but it would be nice to see this one too. But like Villa and, like, Derry.
They're non-negotiables.
They're the pillars and everything else is working.
It's funny, like, to follow all the things you'd want to follow, it is difficult. So, like, yesterday I was watching Ulster Toulouse, flicked over to Ariel Kieran just in time to see the winning score, which was great. Then was watching Premier League as well. It's actually quite difficult to follow as much as everything you'd want to follow. And, like, I can see why that emailer is saying that, like, you wouldn't have a life if you really wanted to sit down.
No, but if you have somebody who's very informed telling you, okay, here's the deal from the game that you missed. It's great. It's fine. I get the gist, I can follow that. I don't need to, because, I mean, we'll come to the rugby in a second, but, like, we were chatting pre-coming on air, 11 of the 12 matches in the Champions Cup this weekend were kind of double-digit figure blowouts in most cases. A rugby match is about 2 hours a pop now.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, it's what I said when I came on last week and teed it up. I could tell Danny, like, tune in by the semi-final stage and you can just listen to podcasts up until then if you really want to see the actual cut and thrust of the games that will be kind of relevant and close. Yeah,
so I think this trend will only exacerbate. People will have less and less time they're willing to spend watching sport, but I don't think their interest is diminished. And therefore, the best ways to collate what's happened on the weekend for those people during the week, be that podcast where they can, as long as the self-driving car doesn't take her over, we have a chance in the short term. But then YouTube highlights, like, there's a reason Sky have just said, sod it, let's just put the highlights up for free.
Yeah.
It keeps the interest in the machine going. But I only think that will become more and more common, for sure.
But it's funny, I operate on the basis of doing a show like this or a podcast that the people listening will have seen what we're talking about.
It's so funny you say that.
It's actually pressure I feel now to describe to Danny about what happened this weekend.
That's really interesting, because actually in the podcast today, it affects what is a natural conversation with Jonathan, because I had sat and watched the Arsenal match, he'd seen the Arsenal match, Arsenal came up briefly, and I sort of said, by the way, talk about bad defending, what about Kirior for the goal? Terrible. And Jonathan straight away was like, it's just awful, yeah. And then I did have the thought, hang on,
I didn't describe it.
If anyone's listening and they haven't seen it, this podcast has to be for both. But so you don't want it to be like, so Arsenal, this happened in the 10th minute, then they scored, then you don't want to do that. Yes. But equally, you have to allow for the fact that, people listening.
That's funny.
But they were going to visit Santa with their kids. They may have prioritised that over watching Arsenal Fulham. So I did see it in my head. I thought, that's a mistake. You should have actually.
It's funny because it would never occur to me to be like, and the Jordie Barrett try, and then like explain it. I would just assume everyone has seen it. Yeah.
It's if me and you were talking in the office, it would be very unnatural for you to go, Sam Prendergast's second try, whatever point you wanted to make, you would never do a tangent where you'd say, so I thought what happened, it was a 38 minute and the situation is this, you know.
But the difference is you might ask the person you're talking to, oh, and Joe, did you see that try? And then you might talk
that's true.
On a podcast, I'm not going to be like, and did you see what I'm about to say?
But they do have to meet you halfway at some point.
Because podcast listeners.
Yeah.
Don't you lay off them.
No, and I'm with
Danny. Danny.
But I am trusting that Danny is dipping in to know. Like, he knows what all these players are like. He knows what they've done. He's seen enough games throughout the weeks.
There's a residual knowledge, for sure.
Like, you can't read the Soap magazine the whole time. You need to, at some stage, you need to flick on Coronation Street and know what's going on. Yeah. And then you can keep reading the magazine. But every week or two, you have to come back into the full episode.
Well, yeah, it would be unreasonable to expect someone to listen and expect it blow by blow of every match. You have to have some knowledge. Like, we can't handhold people completely.
What am I doing here? Like, I can't.
It wouldn't be a fun conversation doing that. Yeah. So, Danny, not alone, I suspect. I'd be curious for people's thoughts on that. Indosport podcast at independent.ie.
We should do a separate podcast that actually just describes what,
like the
Fulham Arsenal will just go through the game and tell people what happened.
Like an audiobook version of
and
the
it's
weekend.
like, it's in your feed right now. If you missed the Fulham Arsenal game, we've done a recap.
That actually, that's not sounding like a terrible idea, actually.
Should we make a podcast?
I don't know. Because especially with Premier League, when the highlights are all 3 minutes free on YouTube.
Why is it 3 minutes?
Yeah, I would think they've done some kind of deep research and figured that's the attention span.
Because they are, no matter what the scoreline is, if it's 1-0 or 4-3, it's 3. It's like, come on, you're slacking off on some replays for me now for 4-3.
Do you know what though? If it was 5 minutes, I'd be a bit like, 5 minutes.
That's interesting.
I would. Yeah. 3 is like grand.
Yeah. For YouTube, I'm rarely watching YouTube on my phone. I'm sitting with a desktop or it's on my TV, so I want it to be longer than 3 minutes. I don't want to have to pick a new video every time. But
look, Slattery didn't come here to talk about this shit. When's the rugby starting? That's all he cares about. So, Champions Cup. Munster 33, Stade Francais 7. It was Saturday 5:30. In the first minute, no. So that was Munster 33-7. Ian Costello, interim coach. Ulster yesterday. Munster were Saturday. Ulster yesterday away to Toulouse 6 times in 6 years, and it was not good yesterday. 61 points conceded by Ulster, and then the weekend rounded off with Leinster beating Bristol away. We'll get your thoughts on some of those specifics in a moment, but just in broad terms. Friday night, La Rochelle away to Bath, close match. O'Gara, his usual combustible self, apologising to a fan nearby for some language. You're like, you know what? We were harsh in this tournament, I thought. I was like, we were harsh in this tournament. It's got something. And then literally all 11 matches over the weekend. You think about this. All 11 matches, all double-digit wins, defeats, blowouts in most cases. That is very problematic. And that's not just because, there are mismatches. It's because in the case, for instance, of Stade Francais, they're playing dud teams. They've had a bad start in the top 14. Like they lost 7 of their 11 matches, or certainly only had 4 wins and 11 in the top 14, sacked their coach. Last year, they lost all 4 pool games. They've kind of stopped being a real entity in this tournament over the last decade. But they turn up with a callow team. They get hockeyed. It's very disappointing.
Yeah, like once the teams are named on a Friday, kind of you have an inkling as to what some of the scorelines might be. Like Stad, made raft of changes. Cass made a raft of changes to play Northampton, and it reflects badly on the tournament. Obviously, when we were talking about it last week, some of these things we raised about the priorities certain teams bring to it. The Stade Francais game, it was funny because for Munster, they played Bayonne in the opening game last year. It was a carbon copy in terms of Bayonne coming with the weak team, and Munster actually drew that game and didn't get a bonus point, so it was a complete disaster. So they got the job done, which is the most important thing. But yeah, for the tournament, it's not great. Like of those 11 games, one of them, to be fair, was Toulon going to South Africa and winning by 10 points. So that's kind of the outlier. Yeah. But the other 10 were won by the favourites and won comprehensively by the favourites. So after Friday night, the rest of the weekend, there wasn't huge drama, jeopardy. There was some interesting talking points from the various Irish games that we might get to. But in terms of an overall week one, of only 4 rounds of pool matches, it was pretty forgettable.
Yeah. So what are the talking points that jump out from Munster?
For Munster, I was really interested to see Jack Crowley and how he would bounce back after what was a very tricky November for him, like going in as the incumbent, leaving as the backup. I thought he played really well again. His grubber kicks, like the one he got against Australia that kind of teed up Gus McCarthy's winning try, thought he kind of, dragged Stade Francais around a good bit with that. Craig Casey's is in an interesting place. Conor Murray's coming to the end of his career. Gibson Park did not have a great November by his standards. Like Craig Casey was there in the summer in South Africa. He picked up that injury at the end of the first test, but had a really good game up to that point. He's starting to put some pressure on Gibson Park, I think.
You think, really?
It's funny. Yes, in terms of performance, but Gibson Park is one of those players that I just don't see him being dropped.
And Gibson Park himself, I think, said carrying a bit of an injury or coming back from a bit of an injury in November would hold his hands up and say not quite himself.
Yeah.
But obviously if Gibson Park gets back to himself, it's not even a conversation then.
No, it's not. To be fair, when he's playing really well, he was driving a lot of what Ireland were doing well over the 2023, early 24. It was kind of based off his speed of ball.
Yeah.
But Craig Casey, can do that as well. Like, so their performance was very interesting. I thought they really changed that Australia game when they came on in the final quarter. So in a game where Munster were from pretty early doors comfortably going to win it, I thought that was something of interest.
Yeah. Peter O'Mahony had
a great game.
Didn't he?
Yeah. His line-out work is really good. Like, there's a lot of talk about the Irish line-out. It can't be underestimated that while I don't think he can have the impact in general play at this point of his career, he is a really good line-out option for Ireland. And he's really good at opposition ball. Like I mentioned, I think it was on the left wing last week, Ireland didn't steal a single opposition throw in November. Oh. 4 matches, not a single opposition throw. You saw Manny the weekend. He is a nightmare for opposition line-out throwers. He really is good at stealing those balls. So that's a massive kind of void in the team. Okay. And that's something that Ireland really do need to kind of find if O'Mahony's going to be phased out, which he will be over the next kind of end of this season into next season.
There's still this kind of shroud of secrecy over Graham Rowntree's departure, officially at least. Yeah. Anything in the vibe at Thomond Park? Did the players look heartbroken? Did they look freed from the shackles of something? Anything kind of jumping out there?
It's a really strange situation. I don't think it's been handled well at all by Munster. Whatever about it, making a change when they did, this kind of veil, and I'm sure everyone, maybe I was going to say everyone listening, I'm sure, but given our earlier conversation, people might be clued in. There's lots of talk about things behind the scenes and why Graham might have departed, that nothing has been, until Graham Rowntree maybe gives an interview, we won't know, what those are. But one thing that Ian Costello spoke quite openly about in the build-up to this game was how they've changed their training. Because that was, I think, one bugbear was Graham Rowntree's training style, and it was quite a physically intensive style, and that they maybe dialed back on that. And it's hard to take much. Friday will be a much better test for Munster away to Cast. Our colleague Keane Tracy's going over there. Last time he was there, the president came in with a cheese board before the game and wine for the travelling press pack. So I think that's a Cast tradition. But that's a game that I think they should be winning. Cast are not one of the tournament's big beasts. If they can go and win there, it'll be a much better gauge of where they were at than Stade Francais, where they had 2 second rows sent off and 2 minutes in the second half for outrageous acts of foul play. One was a swinging clothesline and one was a proper power bomb you would see in WWE. That's a cliche when you see, it's like a wrestling move. This actually was like a wrestling move. Yeah. He picked Craig Casey up in a Batista power bomb style, and luckily he landed kind of on his shoulder and not his head. He could have really badly injured him. So started 2 men sent off, and from that point of view, would have like to have seen Munster kick on a little further and put a few more scores on the board, because in this tournament, seeding points difference can be very valuable. Munster probably didn't get the max out of that game that they ought to have done, considering the advantage they had. But ultimately, 5 points on the board, considering how they started last year's tournament, is a positive.
Yeah, helps the vibes. Leinster-Bristol was a really strange game. The first half was a complete turkey. The weather was very bad for first 20-25 minutes. That didn't help things. But Bristol, who had scored 36 tries in 7 games, Leinster, who pride themselves on their attacking play, they couldn't score. It was 7-all at half time. Yeah. So it was strange. And then second half, it was still semi in the balance, and this ridiculous Leinster bench was unleashed about 45, 55 minutes. So what was it? Doris off the bench, Porter, Jordie Barrett, Orgy Snyman. It was a joke.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I can easily say it was the strongest bench ever to take the field in a Champions Cup game, because usually those guys would start.
So this is not breaking news. Jordie Barrett has some lovely touches. Oh my God. So he was jogging. I was like, well, let's see what you got then. And then 10, 15 minutes in, you're like, oh man, you're so classy.
Yeah. Because in some ways, like, it's easier for Snyman to make an eye-catching impact because second rows don't really do what he does. Whereas Barrett just does what a really good player does, but just better and crisper and sharper and faster. And I was intrigued, like you were, to see where he would fit in, where he would play. They rejigged the team a little bit, and it actually, I think, stumbled upon what the formula will be, which is Jordie Barrett 12, Henshaw 13, Ringrose 14 potentially. That's like getting all your best players on the wing. Like, Barrett's here for 6 months? Like, he's not here. You don't need to be minding him. Like, you might as well get your pound of flesh out of bringing an All Black inside the tent and showing him how Leinster do things and Irish rugby do things to a degree. So I thought from that perspective it was the real positive for Leinster. Obviously, they were expected to win. It was an awful first half and they ultimately did win. But the Barrett piece of it I thought was interesting because I think I maybe had earmarked him for the 23 jersey just because of his versatility, and they already have a lot of good players, but no, he has to start.
I was just about to say, that was the other thing. I was like, oh God, he has to start. It's non-negotiable. Sam Prendergast, of course, scored 2 tries. There's real O'Gara watching Humphreys up the road and then responding the next day vibes to Prendergast scoring his 2 tries.
It was great to see the 2 out halves play so well, but just before I touch on Sam Prendergast, like, what an awful 5 weeks it's been from Kieran Frawley. Like, he got a tweak in his back in the first half, so it got subbed off for Barrett, who comes on and they rejig it and Barrett plays unbelievable. He went from going into November battling for the Ireland starting jersey to now being out of the Leinster team. Like, and through 20 bad minutes. I don't think someone's career has probably flipped on such a small amount of game time. Yeah. But from Prendergast's point of view, like, he's been getting obviously a lot of attention. What really stood out to me, and it's usually a funny thing because often you might think, let's not judge an out half on maybe the eye-catching moments. Let's judge him on the 80 minutes, how he manages the game. But for me, the pace and turn of foot he showed for those 2 tries was very important because I hadn't seen that from him up to now. I was actually kind of surprised with the level of publicity he was getting from certain people because I was like, I hadn't actually seen that kind of degree of play from him to warrant such a elevation. But the little bit of gas, the show and go off that Barrett pullback is really good. Even bursting upfield with RG Snyman and having that tracking line and finishing it off under the post, like, that was very athletic, and I didn't know if he had that in his locker.
Yeah, because we all have funny gaits. He's got a gait that didn't suggest rapid kind of pace. I would have said the way he just kind of trots along.
Yeah,
and I had the same thought. I thought, now he's got triple threat.
Yeah, exactly, because he is a really good passer. Like, everyone has probably seen that up to now. But if he can marry that with an ability to slip through a gap, it'll make him very difficult to defend.
Big time.
My concern was I hadn't seen the running element, so it would make his passing a lot easier to shut down, because if he's not offering a threat,
it's Ross Byrne's problem.
Kind of, yeah, but not as good a passer. But yeah, it is. If you're not a running threat, it makes it very easy to defend you. Whereas that was the big takeaway from his performance. He also kicked well in very tough conditions, and some of the conversions were kind of near the post. But I thought it wasn't an unbelievable performance, but it showed enough there to be like, he is a starting 10 for Leinster now.
Yeah,
and to a degree, does that mean he's starting for Ireland? I suppose we'll see how Crowley responds, and it tees up hopefully that Christmas game on the 27th.
The Rory O'Connor one is how I've come to reference it. He's obsessed with this.
Yeah,
he's insisting they both start. It's non-negotiable for him
for the Christmas day or the Christmas game.
Yeah. Stephen's Day, I presume, is it?
The 27th this year. It's a Friday, so it kind of makes it a little more sense. Yeah, but the thing is, I am intrigued to see how they manage the out-half thing. It does look like Prendergast now. I didn't expect him to start. It's funny you mentioned Rory O'Connor. We were chatting before they named the Leinster team, and he thought Ross Byrne was going to start, and I was like, that will just send people into a meltdown. I was like, I really hope he does, just for the reaction. But no, Prendergast, as I said, played really well, and now they play Claremont on a short week.
Yeah. Claremont home or away?
Home, yeah, in the Aviva. So you'd expect them to win that and look good doing it, and I'm interested to see what kind of team they pick, because it was a real kind of, this is how it can come together when they have Snyman on the pitch, when they have Barrett on the pitch, and when they have Doris, Conan, Van der Fleer on the pitch.
Yeah.
Now, it was Bristol, it wasn't La Rochelle, it wasn't Toulouse. So,
But they were up for the game, Bristol, and they're Premiership leaders. Like, it wasn't nobody.
It wasn't nobody, but
I take your point. Leinster, by the way, have beaten English opposition 13 times in a row now. Obviously, it's unhelpful that their Achilles heel was Saracens in Champions League finals, but
there's a fairly big health warning to that stat. It sounds good, but when they lost the previous 2 to Saracens, yeah.
Are you still with us?
I am still with you.
Yeah, but sorry. Really though,
I am. Yeah, of course, Jordie Barrett should be starting. 23 is outrageous. I know that much.
Can we just quickly, we'll come to this tomorrow. So Ulster 61 points conceded. It doesn't matter what's going on. That was just unacceptably bad, wasn't it?
So, like, very curious. So, you see the team selection, as I mentioned earlier. You get kind of a sense of what the vibe might be when you see the team selection. Like, Richie Murphy opted to put Rob Herring, Izashukwu, Henderson, and Nick Timoney all on the bench. Like, Nick Timoney didn't play a minute in November. Like, the idea that he would need to be managed or minded. He obviously had an eye on Bordeaux at Kingspan in Belfast this weekend and saying, let's just target that. But Ulster got 3 tries in that game. Could have easily got a 4th if you had gone a little stronger. And then you're leaving with a bonus point, which is valuable. I know we talked about it. It's not as valuable as it was maybe in the old format, but like Ulster could have played their strongest team. They still would have lost that game by 20 points probably. Just where Toulouse are at the moment, they're just light years ahead of Ulster. Toulouse would do that or a version of that to 75% of the teams, I would say. But the fact that he didn't even go with his strongest team when a lot of those international players barely featured in November, I just thought sent a message of this is not a game we're really targeting, and it's, you know, the flaw in the format. If they win against Bordeaux, which they probably won't, but if they do win against Bordeaux, they have 1 foot in the next stage. So he was prioritising it. I actually don't, even though the scoreline is exceedingly ugly, I actually don't come out of that being like disastrous for Ulster. I just think Toulouse are light years ahead of them. I'd be more disappointed that they didn't get the 4th try, to be honest. That's where my head would be at. Like, Ulster are not competing with Toulouse. So I didn't expect much difference. Like, that's not to excuse their performance necessarily, just the realities of where the two teams are at. Like, Toulouse are so far ahead of Ulster.
Yeah. That's not the rugby chat you wanted, but it's the rugby chat you got. I'm sorry.
I hope Danny took something from the last 10
Yeah. Danny, that was your quick guide. We'll come back to the rugby in a bit more depth.
Can I raise one more point?
Later on this week. It's up to Conan. Is it rugby related?
It is.
Conan, what's your threshold?
I've got a Graham Rowntree take then after Will's point, so we've got 2 more points coming.
Well, fine, now you go. Mine wasn't that interesting anyway. So.
No, go on, go.
No, I just wanted to touch on the Leinster first half and how poor they were, and the discipline, which was really, really bad. And, you know, given the crossover between the two teams, I think it's fair to conflate Ireland's discipline issues in November with what we saw in the first 30 minutes, like 3 foot trips from 3 different players. You know, Ronan Kelleher being matched back 10 yards for having a go at the referee. It's very uncharacteristic things from those players that usually your discipline is squeaky clean, and it's one of the real kind of points of difference between Ireland and some of the other countries is that they don't really give away those really kind of dumb penalties. But yesterday was just like, especially when the game was in the balance and you see the end score and you think, oh, who cares? But in a different kind of game, those could have been vital. And I just thought it was interesting that you're seeing that kind of level of indiscipline, because I don't know what it speaks to necessarily, but it's an issue that's been cropping up repeatedly over the last 6 weeks or so, and it's something that Leinster and Ireland need to definitely fix.
Yeah, it's true. In GA News, Brian Fenton speaks. So really great conversation with Michael Foley in the Sunday Times at the weekend, where he just went through his thought process, how this retirement has come about at the age of 31. Like, it opens in very kind of dramatic fashion. It was Portugal in May, says the piece, when retirement first invaded Brian Fenton's thoughts. The timing alone told him this was real, not some passing funk, because the Dubs were on a training camp. The sun was warming his back. He was released from the microscopic attention back home to train. He was hanging out with his friends. This should have been perfection. Why here? Why now? So what he says is, I was going back to our accommodation and I just said, I'm not enjoying this at all. This is in Portugal. And I really should have been. We're in the sun. Every other box is ticked. I remember thinking, Jesus, I'm just not getting the buzz out of this that I should be. And he struggles all year to shake it. Like, he talks about making jokes a few times about, God, I'm on the road 10 years. This is all getting a bit samey or whatever. And his teammates going, would you stop? You'll play forever. You know, but he almost is like testing the waters. How do I feel about almost saying this out loud, even in a semi-jokey way? But his conviction that it was the right time to go hardened across the year. And he talked about feeling a certain guilt in retiring. I still feel the pull of letting them down. You still feel you can add something, but you have to be true to yourself. He says the actual process of retiring was horrific, because he's very, very close to Desi Farrell. And at one point in the piece, he talks about how in Desi's first year, when things didn't go well, the players had private meetings almost to the effect that, like, we're letting Desi down here. We need to kind of sort this out. And that prompted the All-Ireland win in the end. But he said the process took 4 weeks, dragged him through every emotion, a lot of back and forth, you know, like, can you take a year out? Or, you know, the new playing rules are about to reinvent the game in your favour. He says of those, I'm regretful it wasn't 2 years ago. I would have loved them. He's also had injuries this year. What about after the operation? But he said, this isn't my plan at all. But if I was to say I'm stepping away for a year, people would just be asking, what's your plan? That would annoy me more than just deal with the retirement statement. My plan is never to return. So it was just interesting, just not feeling it with Fenton. That's kind of the gist. Not feeling it this year at all. Never shook it off. Just, I've done what I've done. And he just couldn't get himself out of it and didn't want to commit to being less than 100% committed. So he said, you know what, I'm really at peace with going. And he gets married next year. And that's that. He did, by the way, tell one really good story. You should go and read the piece, by the way, not to relay the whole thing. It's a longer piece than my synopsis is suggesting. So October 22, Fenton goes down to Spa outside Killarney with the group that included Niall Scully, Brian Howard, that's where his dad's from. And they go into Jimmy Bryan's pub, which is a very football-y pub down in Killarney. And down in the bar was David and Paddy Clifford, Darren Moynihan, Micheál Burns. And this was just a couple of months since Sean O'Shea had kicked the winning score that had shattered Dublin in the All-Ireland semi-final. So Fenton says, we're whispering, let's get out of here. This is a nightmare. Jimmy Bryan's, it's a tiny pub, so we'll have one. We can't leave straight away. Then one turns into two. Then we're whispering, we're not leaving first, all right? Third pint called. And then a Dublin club match went up on the TV screen. One of the Kerry boys piped up. Someone replied from their Dublin group. And then Mick Foley writes, lads started meeting on the ways to the toilets. Eventually they start drinking together. And later that night, Fenton found himself in a bar with David Clifford, witnessing extraordinary interactions that are somehow a normal part of Clifford's life. And Fenton says, he's like a beetle. People were genuinely coming up and just touching him, like they were touching Jesus Christ. And so he says 10 months later, Kerry, they've just beaten Kerry in the All-Ireland final. Clifford's on his haunches. And it's quite a famous photograph of Fenton kind of gripping Clifford's hand. Fenton went to him and grasped his hand. 2 months had passed since Clifford's mother had died. Fenton was 20 when his mother, Marion, died of cancer. The tears come again. I just said to him, look, she's very proud of you. I've been there. I felt that pain. He says, I don't know. When players come over to me and they're shaking my hand, I'm like, will you ever feck off? You're like, whatever. Right, thanks. He was probably thinking that, but I just kind of felt the desire to tell him. That's all. So that'll give you a taster of what's a really good piece. But so there's no... As he tells it, there's no falling out or necessarily like great drama to it. It's like just a sense as of this year, God, I'm just not feeling it.
Yeah. It just sounds like a man who was ready to retire. The unfortunate thing for Brian Fenton is that it's the classic GA thing where he's at a certain level, and as everybody knows in the GA world, if you're too good a player, you're not allowed to retire. That's never an issue. Even if you step away, you're going to be pulled back in at some point. Like him taking a year out would have been disastrous all year. It would have been once we get him back.
Or they lose 4 games in the National League. Can you come back now?
Get him in for championship. Yeah, the place is there for you. These boys aren't up to it. It would have been a big shadow for the young players coming through for him. And it's just funny. Like this boy's been thinking about this since April, May, maybe before, and then he really sort of comes to terms with it. Like he's out in Portugal, like he says, and thinks, I'm not enjoying this. Like I know myself from a much smaller point of view, when I retired club-wise, I was going to training very grumpy. And then I was like, I'm the issue here. It's not everybody else. I've been doing this for 15 years and it's me not enjoying it anymore. It's the exact same thing. And then Brian Fenton is the exact same thing. The training is the exact same thing.
Yeah, he did mention picking up the bag to training and just not feeling excited to go.
Dragging himself there. And then, but he's been thinking about this for months, finally breaks the news, and it takes another 4 weeks of people trying to convince him of the stuff he already knows. I know the new rules are coming in. I know I'm a very good player. But the hardest thing for him, I'd say, is that he's a very good player, and he feels an obligation to Desiree Farrell. He feels an obligation to his teammates, and he talks about chatting to his dad about it. You think a Kerry man in him would be relieved. It's like, thank God this boy's retiring. But like that's the hard thing when you're that good and you've been that successful. People sort of look up to you as if they need you, and you feel that neediness from them.
Yeah, and bar injury, and maybe even including injury, he's like at present the best player to ever just walk away in terms of his current abilities. Like Jack O'Shea played on till 92. it was just age.
Yeah.
Nobody of his current, like, if it was the start of the season and you said, give me the odds on footballer of the year, he'd be in the top 4 or 5. As if you're talking about bet. Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
It's a good point, though, that no one's ever walked away from like an inter-county career as successful as this because they wanted to at a younger... Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, McCaffrey took a year out to travel, I guess. Yeah. That was a big one. And he's never quite come back in the same way, to the same extent. But yeah, it's amazing.
I remember Dick Clerkin wrote a piece when he retired in the Indo, and it was heartbreaking, really lovely piece about his last game for Monaghan, and he didn't get on. And he was warming up.
Oh, dear.
And then he said, like, I'm getting like goosebumps because it actually makes me emotional. But he said as he's warming up, running down the sideline, his child was running alongside him in the stand. Like, just such a powerful thing. But he didn't get on, and he realised then that was him done. But he really embraced that warming up thing of it. Like,
it's like a symbolic... Moving from one phase of my life to the next.
And this guy who'd been playing from the 90s with Mon, he was the last player that was playing in the last century when he retired.
If that was in a movie scene, you'd say, it's a little much. It's a little on the nose. Like, we get it.
One thing that might make it slightly easier for him to step away, the David Clifford story he told there, like, if that was in Kerry, say, and he was the same thing, everywhere he went, people would be saying, why aren't you playing? Can you come back? Whereas in Dublin, like, I've been in places in town or something, and to be like Dublin footballers there, like, they go unnoticed. Like, to my eye anyway, like, people would just stand there having a bar, people would know, or have a drink at the bar, no one would really recognise him to the same degree. So he can kind of slip into a somewhat normal, post-retirement life, whereas in a kind of a GA mad fishbowl like Killarney, say, where David Clifford's from, every single person in that town knows who he is and would have opinions on whether he should be playing or not playing. So I think hopefully from Brian Fenton's perspective, he doesn't have that experience, and he can just... He's made a decision, and he can kind of maybe just go back into a regular life.
Yeah. Be interesting to see a year, 18 months go by. Does he get a twitch? We'll see. We're pretty much done. The only other thing from the weekend, Errigal Kieran are Ulster champions. Enda McGinley is their manager. People know Enda. They beat Kilcoo by a point. That's their third ever Ulster title, 93 and 02. You said you wanted to make an observation on this situation?
Yeah, well, it was actually a good game. It was low scoring. Errigal Kieran won by a point. Very ratty match. A lot of
like niggle and fisticuffs.
Yeah, going overboard. Noel Mooney.
But that's Ulster football for you.
Yeah, that's it. And every time I see it and I see the online commentary, sometimes I'm like, boys, you're not helping yourselves. This is what they want. This is what they want to say. But Noel Mooney did make a brave red card at one stage. Darrell Brannigan shouldered into the jaw of another player. But there's a goal in the first minute. And it was Joe Goose scored it through a Tyrone player, and it was Rory Canavan and Dara Canavan that created it. And Dara Canavan just brilliantly drops the ball. He picks it up on his way back down and throws it across. Legally, throws it across, but he throws it into a man in the square, and it's a square ball. But the goal counts. And I was just thinking, next year, if there's a goal like that, if there's a new rule that isn't implemented, everyone's going to be like, well, see, we told you the new rules don't work. Referees can't possibly marshal this. There we are in an Ulster final. The referee, who's actually a really good referee, Noel Mooney, I remember he did a great game for Kerry this year, but referees make mistakes, and we just sort of accept that happens, and we carry on.
So, moral of the story: it's worth us remembering that next year.
Yeah, I'll bring it back up. I'll be like, the Ulster Club final last year, there was something like this as well, and there's always issues, and you prefer them to be cleaned up. But like, generally, what happens is, when the mistakes happen, we say, well, if that happens again, though, they're running a risk of getting caught. Yeah. And Enda McGinley, another Tyrone man linked to the Derry job, but I'm sure we'll talk about the Derry management job.
We're going to get to it any day now. Yeah, it's true, because I guess the FRC's worst nightmare is like a two-pointer. His toenail VAR style is on the line, is it not on the line? Yeah. And it's an All-Ireland final, and it's the last minute, and people will say, well, this is why you can't get referees to expect them to kind of be on top of these things. But I guess square ball is a good analogy to that kind of a situation, because it is just like, was he in the square or not, and it's going to be close margins. Because you just have to get on with it.
You just have to get on with it. Like, people will say, what happens if, just suppose you have three players up in the other half, what happens if they bring somebody out and the ref doesn't see it? It's like, well, if he does see it, you get a free kick. Yeah. Like, a ref might not see, especially in that game, ref missed a lot of punches in the face as well. Right. But if he sees it, you get sent off. Like, that's the risk you run. If you want to play that game, there's rules there, and if you get caught breaking them, then you'll be punished.
Yeah. Okay, fair point. I suspect you will have to remind us of that next year. I think it will kick off. There will be a... See?
I'll be like, remember the Ulster Club game last year? You'll see, remind me of that again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Will, it wasn't what you came here for, but it's what you got.
Before I go, I know I'm raising lots of last points.
Yeah.
Are we going to get your Graham Rowntree? You had a Graham Rowntree opinion you were preparing to deliver before I thundered back in?
I'm not sure he did.
Well, I actually did have one thought during that conversation where it was like, this is a cycle of every team, isn't it? Where it goes from they're training too hard.
Yes.
Okay, we need somebody to.
Well, it's
let us
funny.
relax.
Leinster have gone from Stuart Lancaster and chaos and Stews days, as they were known because they were so intense, to, it seems, Rory O'Connor told me this, is not my information. Nina Barr saying we need to be a bit fresher.
Yeah.
Less during the week, deliver on match day. So
But that will turn.
Absolutely.
Too relaxed. We need somebody to give a kick up the hole.
It's a constant reaction to the previous regime.
Well, the Andy Farrell, how relaxed the camp is. I'm close to saying we need a Schmidt-like level. The
Here we
discipline
go.
is getting out of hand. We need a Schmidt-level attention to detail. That's coming.
That is coming.
If it hasn't yet arrived.
I think human nature is that it's a constant recalibration, isn't it? Yeah. I either eat very well or at present. You want to see. It's just a disgrace. It's a constant one to the other. Though Andy Farrell hates the whole, it's a camp, we're all happy, it's a holiday camp, we're all having a great time. He's starting to resent that characterisation of his
It seems that way.
tenure.
He had a test in November.
Yeah.
He doesn't think like that, yeah.
We'll see what Simon Easterby's about. That was Bits and Bobs. Thank you for doing that. Much appreciated. Indosport Podcast at independent.ie is the email address, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.